most oligarchies, if in a sort of non-ideological sense, so if you go to medieval oligarchies or Florentine oligarchies in feudal medieval Italy, their first concern is the security of their own power, right? And so young oligarchs are raised with the knowledge that they are better than the peasants, they are different to them, and they have obligations. Right? You will be carrying the family line. You have to make sure that you've done this, 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 and this to make sure that our power and prestige and wealth is secure. The Blairite oligarchy doesn't do any of this. It actually does the complete opposite. It says, no, we're all universal. Everyone's exactly the same. We want to hide diversity. We want our ethnic replacements to come in and act. So they actively recruit their own replacements outside of the system and outside of the ethnos that initially created the oligarchy. And they give them no tactical education. It's all idealistic. It's all, that's far right if you think of anything outside of the scope that the dream has in it. And I think that's why they're grasping now at fictional TV programs, because they don't. I think they genuinely don't have the training to maintain the oligarchy.
Yes.
And I don't think they know what to do. And we've already seen the independent Muslim MPs. You can imagine at some point there are going to have to be like Jess Phillips, Wes Streeting, Keir Starmer, and the cabinet sat around in a room going, look, what are we going to do about this? The Muslims are going to vote for their own, and I'm losing my seat in the next election. Half the cabinet are losing their seats in the next election. What are we going to do about it? They have to be having some sort of realistic conversation about that. But it's way too late. It's way too late. There's nothing they can do about this. They have great replaced themselves.
Well, they are such. They read on to the extent that they really care about the truth of their theories, and to the extent that they're true believers. They really do think that they really have fatally misread human nature.
Yes.
And so, like at the outset of the project, the whatever we want to call it, the Blairite project, if you want to call it that, there was a sort of an idealistic hope that, well, of course, the Muslims will remain long-term political dominoes on the ground who will. They won't develop sort of tribalistic feelings of their own. They won't ever view the Labour Party as a superfluous vehicle, will they? For the achievement of their own theocratic ends. We'll be fine. All they'll be is a great way of rubbing the right's nose in diversity and rendering their arguments out of date, as Andrew Nether admitted in the Evening Standard.
He did, but I also suspect that the Labour Party thought that what they were doing is creating permanent constituencies.
Indeed.
Yeah, yes. They not only we're rubbing the right's nose in it, but we think we're securing our future.
Well, that's where rendering their arguments out of date comes from, because because what matters in a democracy is who the demos is.
Yep.
That seems to be important.
I would think it might be
in the word. And so if like it's just a fact about like there is a counterintuitively, intuitively we might think that the more diverse a given territory becomes, the more people will just become conditioned and accustomed and acclimatized to hearing a multitude of different perspectives. It will be there will be a glorious concatenation of ideas. Things will be vibrant. The best ideas will
feels like the Tower of Babel.
It does indeed. Yeah. The best ideas will win out. The dogmatic stragglers will lose, and we'll be better off for it. But what actually happens in those sorts of environment is that whichever group is most willing to push and angle in the most hardline fashion for its own interests, those will become the authoritative standards. And a useful thought experiment. Gladstone in the 1870s made speeches against Islam on the floor of the House of Commons that would have him thrown out of every single mainstream political party today, including Reform. He was
especially
Reform. Wazir Yusuf would not tolerate that Gladstonian rhetoric about the evils of the Prophet. So Gladstone was on the floor of the House of Commons, and he was basically railing against what the Turks were doing in the Balkans, committing atrocities, particularly against Bulgarians. And he thought he was a kind of liberal humanitarian type, and he thought this was outrageous. And he was a kind of an Anglican Christian, and he made these very disobliging remarks about Islam. Okay, so he did that, and he did that pretty fearlessly. Imagine if he'd had a huge Turkish diaspora in his Greenwich constituency. Like, would he have felt? I mean, he was a morally upright and courageous man, so maybe he would have made those speeches anyway.
Someone who wasn't as strong as Gladstone
might have caved, and maybe even Gladstone would have caved because he wouldn't have viewed it as prudent. And so what actually happens is it's not that there's a sort of like a riotous exchange of ideas. People become very, very anxious and very, very cautious, particularly and particularly the group that is most moderate in its groupishness, namely in this case the host population itself, we're the ones who become very anxious about expressing our views. And so there was maybe a naive assumption on the part of people like Andrew Nether, who was advising Blair in the New Labour days, that they misread human nature in that way, and they probably miscalculated how there could come a point in the future when these kind of imported diasporas would reach a critical mass, develop have a very strong group consciousness of their own, which in future would make these sort of fuddy-duddy institutions like the Labour Party perfectly superfluous. And they're living through that, and they can't really revert back now either, because
what can they do?
Because they're not exactly likely to win the host population over, given what they've done over the last
they can't. There's none
30 to 40 years.
So, I mean,
indeed. Well, certainly in those constituencies.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yes.
In those constituencies, no, your time is done. And so it's just like going back to the fundamental job of an oligarchy is to secure its own future.
Yeah.
Incredible job by Labour.
And it all stems from the misread of human nature.
Completely
because good oligarchy, oligarchies have a bad rap, so maybe there's no such thing as a good oligarchy, but let's just say an aristocracy. A good aristocracy tries to work with the natural instincts and intuitions and with the grain of human nature, tries to cooperate with human nature, and usually does so in ways that are conducive to both short-term and long-term social flourishing. Good monarchs also try and work with the grain of human nature. Good representative republics try and work with the grain of human nature. But as soon as you have got a kind of radical misread on human nature, and I suppose the misread in this case that we're pointing to would be like a failure to understand the differential rates of tribalism and ethnocentrism between groups.
The assumption that we're all the same.
And the assumption that we're all the same, effectively, in the end. And that it's only kind of cultural distortions that render us different. And if we can sort of undistort those cultural inputs, then, happy clappy utopia lies around the corner.
What's interesting on that is I think the differentiation, sort of Aristotelian differentiation between oligarch and aristocracy and king and tyrant, is a really useful one here. Because Aristotle, for anyone who doesn't know, says that the aristocracy and the king are distinguished from the oligarch and the tyrant by their intentions. They're working for the people that they rule over rather than working for themselves. And I was thinking about that as you were talking, because there's a weird lack of possessiveness in our oligarchy. Because I mean, I would think, okay, if I was, whatever, some Labour MP in the late 90s or something, and they were like, right, so we just want to bring in a few 100,000 Muslims to put in this area. I'd be like, okay, but that's mine. Why are you doing this to the thing I own? Because I need that for the future, right? And you are right, the radical misreading. So they'll just be Labour voters forever. It's like, actually, in a generation, they'll be turfing you out. Like literally in 20 years, you're gone. And your party is then, by that point, everyone hates the Labour Party. Like, outside of the very core areas that they've managed to diversify, Labour are getting nothing. If you look at the projections in the next election, it's just like, wow, this is existential threat for you guys. And honestly, Nigel Farage is representing an existential threat to the Conservatives. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of not against the idea that the two main parties then become Reform and the Lib Dems. I'm actually not against that. I've seen a few projections that suggest that's actually going to be the future. Because to be honest with you, like, the Lib Dems are kind of secret racists, and the Reform Party are kind of public patriots, whereas they are actually an anti-racist party. Whereas the Liberal Democrats are public anti-racist but secret racist. Right? So it's an interesting sort of turnaround that, like, whereas you've got Labour and the Conservatives, which are both insane globalist anti-racist parties, so you'd have at least some patriotism in there, even if it was false front patriotism or secret hidden patriotism. At least it's there, right? Whereas in Labour and the Conservatives, you don't have any of that, no possessiveness to the country at all. But at least Reform and the Lib Dems do show some public possessiveness in the culture, where it's fining people for being allowed on the train, or Nigel Farage and Brexit, right? There's at least some possessiveness. Conservatives and Labour just don't show that. They don't seem to care about the country. They don't feel like they're the owners of the country. They feel like they've given it away. I mean, the Conservatives literally have an African immigrant in charge. Like, the Labour Party are literally like, we're going to replace you. So it's, anything else, even if it's wishy-washy Lib Demism or Nigel Farage's just kind of plastic patriotism.
It's like a breath of fresh air.
But it's not intrinsically evil, actually, to the interests of the people of Britain. It's not gonna be great.
It can be mapped onto genuine concern for Britain, even if it might be mislaid concern, or even if it might be mistaken. You're saying that it's not badly motivated, and these are people whose positions exhibit signs that they have a stake in our society. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean, so Nigel Farage, if you ever watch him in interviews, he's like in the Stephen Edgington interview, and I think in the Winston Marshall interview, he talks about the institutions themselves. He's like, look, I'm worried about social disharmony. I'm worried that the institutions of Britain won't keep up. And this is a very boomer coded position. Boomers are very institutionalized. They're not really concerned about the actual state of society. On the other side, the Lib Dems, I think, are actually concerned with the state of society. And I think this is what Ed Davies' famous racist campaign against loud people on the train is. They're actually concerned about the state of society. They're not really bothered about the institutions. They never talk about institutional reform. The Lib Dems just don't think about this at all, even though a lot of the institutions are having a direct impact on society. But they speak from a deeply parochial English perspective. I mean, Ed Davey literally said he wants to become the party of Middle England. It's like, good, mission accomplished. You absolutely are. Look at you, the party of Middle England. And that comes with all those natural prejudices that the Middle English have, which are quite deep running. And the point I always make is that the first machete that runs down a Liberal Democrat street is going to make them vote BNP. Right? They're not haters of England, the Lib Dems. They're insufferable. They are virtue signaling, status insulated, but they're status seeking at parties. Right? They don't hate Britain. The Labour Party hate Britain. The Conservative Party, congenital traitors. But the Lib Dems don't actually hate Britain. They just want to be seen well in public. They're very bourgeois. And Reform, of course, have sucked up the working class vote, who are being directly affected and would like actually quite a hardline patriotism. But Nigel Farage himself, I think, is actually like an anti-racist. Yes. But that's still, he's concerned about the structure of Britain. He's at least thinking of the externals, whereas the Lib Dems are actually thinking about the internals, which I just think is an interesting difference to what we've got now.
If you would like to see the full version of this premium video, please head over to lotuseaters.com and subscribe to gain full access to all of our premium content.